Silent Hill 2. It was released for the PlayStation 2 in 2001. It follows a completely new protagonist. Instead of following up in the story, it starts a completely new one in the same old haunted town of Silent Hill.
The controls are very similar to that of the previous game. It all feels much smoother now, and there's no longer a clunky, awkward pause when shifting from a run to a strafe, or vice versa. The movement flows together very nicely. In addition to the tank controls, you can opt out for a more traditional way of steering James. Point the stick in the direction you want him to go. This is good for newcomers to the series to get a faster hang of the controls. Veteran players are probably going to want to play with the traditional control setup though, as it makes running continuously with suddenly changing cameras and strafing out of harm's way a much easier task. It's really nice to see that they made a choice between control schemes. It adds a layer of accessibility without ruining the familiarity. Combat is identical to Silent Hill 1, weapon types and all. Like moving, combat does feel much smoother and much easier to get a hang of. Graphics have also been improved a great deal, seeing as we move from the PlayStation 1 to the PlayStation 2. The CG cutscenes also look better, but I definitely wouldn't say that they've aged super well. The game's music is as good as ever, delivering many creepy atmospheric pieces much like the first game. However, the music communicates more so a tone of emptiness this time around rather than a tone of intense fear. This game is conveying a completely different mood than the first game, so the change in musical feel is a welcome idea.
The realistic darkness and fog, coupled with the balance of appropriate sound and silence throughout, make it the first game where it's the atmosphere itself that's scary. And the animations and graphics are still above some of today's standards.
The interaction between characters in this game is a lot more awkward than it was in Silent Hill 1. You'll probably notice that the voice acting isn't all that great. It's okay overall, but there are a lot of sour-sounding lines.
Lost?
The fog effects are much more impressive with the improved hardware, but I can't help but to feel that the visibility isn't as obscured as it was in the first game. The radio actually sounds like a radio this time, instead of whatever the hell it was supposed to be last time. Level design is pretty much identical to that of the first game, though this time I find that the use of items is a little more creative. The game sports a combine option when using items. With this option, you can select multiple objects at once if you need them to solve a puzzle, instead of painstakingly bringing up the menu 3 separate times to select each item. There are many more puzzles in this game than there were in Silent Hill 1, which is pretty great considering that the last game left me wanting more. There's actually 2 separate difficulty settings for the puzzles and for the combat. This is a fantastic idea that should definitely be incorporated in more games.
Silent Hill 2 is more intellectual with the puzzles and mysteries you must solve, but not so extremely hard that you have to refer to a walkthrough. When you can't complete a puzzle, it's usually because you're missing some information or an item, and the map's gaming system, complete with symbols, save points, and locked door indicators, makes it easier to spot the room that you forgot to go in.
There is an obsessive amount of detail realized in the environments and especially the story.
Silent Hill 2 focuses on the state of the town in the aftermath of Silent Hill 1, as well as giving a bit of history of the town and its previous inhabitants. Throughout the game, James encounters several other characters which all seem to be similarly damaged and have been called to Silent Hill.
Unlike Silent Hill 1 that had at least some characters who were perfectly sane, all of the characters in Silent Hill 2 seems to be experiencing problems of their own. Like they're all called to the town of Silent Hill for their own personal reason. It seems as if each troubled character in Silent Hill 2 sees the world slightly differently, as they all have different problems and reasons for being called to Silent Hill. This is why the story of Silent Hill 2 really shines. Instead of being some messy plot about the cult and summoning evil gods or something like that, it's about various people with deep emotional problems being called to the town to learn a lesson. These suppressed emotions then become infestated in physical forms, and their very own reality of Silent Hill becomes warped and twisted in their own personal way. I absolutely applaud this game for exploring multiple backgrounds instead of just James's, each having a different result. Right after the hospital, there's a chunk of the game that really feels like a bunch of padding. It involves you having to run all the way back to the part of town you started at to get an item, running all the way back to the park, and then all the way back to the next level.
They really could have done without this bit because it just feels like a big waste of time running all the way back. It takes forever and it's not very fun at all. What they should have done is made it so you just run straight to the level instead.
The next level is probably the scariest part of the game. Wait, hold on. Scary? Have I even talked about scary yet? Well, no. Well, probably because, as far as Silent Hill games go, it's really not that scary. It might be because of the lack of really dark areas or the better visibility. I'm not too sure, but I really don't find Silent Hill 2 all that scary. The prison area still manages to be pretty creepy though, but I definitely say this is the least scary of the first 4 games. My other complaint with the game is that it's too easy. While the first Silent Hill offered a lot of challenge with a tough combat, limited ammo and health, this game doesn't do that quite as well. The combat is still tough, which is good, but the earlier enemies are way too easy to take out with melee weapons without getting hit. Another thing is this game throws items at you like mad. By the end of this game, I had a hell of a lot of unused ammo and health items. Just look at this spot here, there's 3 health drinks altogether. I find this game to be a little too generous with the items, especially since you can find a bunch if you explore the town enough. The first boss battle is kind of really lame. You pretty much just run to the other side of the room, rinse, repeat until he runs away.
And the voice acting is the best voice acting you will ever hear in any game to date.
This town is full of monsters. How can you sit there and eat pizza?
I remember the very first time I heard James say that line, and I laughed really hard.
The line just seems so silly and out of place. It's actually even funnier in the redub they did for the HD collection.
How can you sit there and eat pizza?
The Otherworld doesn't happen nearly as much in this game as it did in Silent Hill 1. After the prison, you'll have to row a boat across the lake, which is the final level. This boat part straight up sucks. The controls of it are really clunky, and it's a very boring segment. The final boss fight's okay. It's not much better than the previous boss fights. The way they all play is pretty average. I'd personally say that I like the battles in the first Silent Hill game better, but every boss in this game serves the story, whether it being symbolic or literal, which in turn has a huge twist that I actually didn't see coming when I first played this game.
I always really like this little bit of subtle glimmer of hope, making you think to yourself, maybe this journey is really worth it.
Overall, I'd say the story is pretty damn good. It's a huge step up from the first games, and it's very clever with the way it represents itself, not just through dialogue and action, but through means of symbolism. I'm not gonna say it's like the holy grail of video game storytelling, but it's definitely pretty damn good.
There are 6 possible endings, ranging from 2 joke endings to 4 psychologically infused explanations.
The game has 3 possible different endings on your first playthrough, each of which depict James dealing with his aftermath in a different way. Each of these 3 endings have a different song that'll play during the credits, all of which are various guitar pieces, much like the introduction song. Each song delivers a different mood that reflects the ending you got. They're all really nice.
However, this time around, they are all the right ending, and the player decides based on how they play the game.
What determines the ending you get is kinda weird. I'm not entirely sure. It's kind of confusing, and it makes aiming for certain endings a little more difficult than in the other titles.
So in the end, is Silent Hill 2 a good game? Yeah, of course it is. I'd easily say it's a better game than the first one. It's not as scary or challenging, but its streamlined controls, additional puzzles and levels, and vastly better story definitely make it a superior game.
There are plenty of chances to re-up on your bullets and health kits. The enemies in Silent Hill 2 are designed to not pose a physical threat, but a psychological threat.
I guess because of the lower amount of scares and the slightly lower difficulty, it's definitely the game in the franchise you're going to want to start with if you want to get into the series. It's much more beginner-friendly than the first game. So overall, I would say it's definitely a better game, but it's not as a scary game. If you ask many Silent Hill fans what their favorite game of the franchise is, they'll usually respond with Silent Hill 2. But is it really that good? Is it the best one in the series?
No offense to anybody, but I think that part of the reason everyone labels this game as their favorite in the series is probably because it's the easiest game in the original 4.
If only they made a sequel that was much scarier and offered much more challenge.
Silent Hill 3 turned out to be what we think to be the best in the series.
Hey guys, and thank you so much for watching this episode. If you could do me a huge favor and click that like button if you enjoyed the episode, I'd highly appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe if you want to see more content in the future. I'd also like to ask you guys for a favor, and I've made a lot of episodes here now, and I've poured a lot of work and effort into them, and I still don't have that many subscribers, so if you could do me a huge favor and share my videos on social media and spread the word around, I would really, words cannot describe how much I would appreciate if you could do that. So you don't have to if you don't want to, but I'm just throwing that out there. I would be very grateful if you could do that for me. But no matter what happens, I'm always gonna push forward and try to make better and better content in the future. So as always, I hope to see you guys in the future, and take care.